What do we really know about the origin of our solar system? Science has attempted to explain the cosmological events that have shaped our neighborhood for hundreds of years, but are these explanations truly accurate, or is it possible that the birth and evolution of our solar system occurred in an entirely unexpected way? Could it be that our ancestors witnessed spectacles in the sky that inspired mythical stories of gods, spectacles where celestial bodies waged cosmic wars? In 1950, Russian-born psychoanalyst Immanuel Velikovsky published a work that sparked interest among the public and a veritable storm in scientific circles. This controversial book, titled Worlds in Collision, proposed a theory of chaos between planets, even as late as historical times. Despite Velikovsky's lack of background in astronomy, his academic career and reputation did not allow for his theory to be outright dismissed. Velikovsky was the first psychiatrist and psychotherapist in Israel, trained directly by Sigmund Freud's famous student, Wilhelm Stekel. Some of Velikovsky's articles were published in Freud's psychoanalytic publication Imago, and during his postgraduate studies in Berlin, he founded his own scientific journal, Scripta Universitatis, occasionally collaborating with Albert Einstein himself. After completing his studies, Velikovsky, along with Einstein and Dr. Chaim Weizmann, established the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Driven by an interest in the human mind, Velikovsky explored ancient sagas, moving to New York City in 1939 with his wife, violinist Elisheva Kramer, to lay the groundwork for his upcoming book Oedipus and Akhenaton. During his research, he discovered an ancient Egyptian poem preserved on papyrus for about 3,600 years. This poem, a dialogue between Ipuwer and the god of the universe, described a time of chaos when rivers ran red as blood and the sky filled with fire. As a scholar, Velikovsky linked this poem to the biblical Exodus, which recounted a similar story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt during the 10 plagues. Velikovsky's interest in the topic eventually consumed his full attention, and thus Worlds in Collision was conceived. After its completion, the manuscript was rejected by 8 different publishers before Macmillan Company dared to publish it in 1950. The ensuing uproar was comparable to the time when Galileo challenged the geocentric model of the solar system with his theory of heliocentrism. The problem was that the academic community could not tolerate the idea that a doctor of psychiatry could dare to publish a theory based on ancient people's sagas. Velikovsky boldly presented the common threads in these sagas, forming a radical and intriguing astronomical theory. Moreover, ancient stories were almost unknown to the scientific community, so their truthfulness was compared to children's fairy tales. Velikovsky's position was not helped by the fact that his book directly challenged scientific claims and made predictions that the scientific world deemed impossible. The strong resistance from the academic community stemmed from the fact that science, long striving to be independent of religion, was now forced to reconsider theses based on, in their view, religious writings. The success of the book among the public was dizzying, and the scientific community was thrown into chaos because Velikovsky's work forced various scientific disciplines to engage in dialogue, an unfamiliar and even avoided practice within the dogmatic community. But what made Velikovsky's work so controversial? After studying ancient texts, myths, words, and carvings from different cultures, he proposed, contrary to scientific belief, that the planet Venus must have been a very late addition to our solar system, appearing around 3,700 years ago with comet-like behavior rather than that of a planet. He also suggested that the gas giants Saturn and Jupiter might have been star-like, but became subjugated to the Sun, which monopolized all the energy in our solar system. Velikovsky considered it very possible that Earth was originally one of Saturn's moons. Indeed, Venus remains a small mystery to us. Described by several ancient peoples, Venus was said to have a long tail or beard and was reported to have caused chaos among other planets before settling into its current place in our system. Velikovsky connected Venus's behavior to the plagues of Egypt described in the Bible, confident that his theory could rationally explain and prove all the plagues. The book threatened the scientific community's slow developmental model and revived the old belief in catastrophic, sudden events. While the world was engrossed in interest in the work, it was noticed that the claims Velikovsky made based on ancient writings were almost impossible to dispute. Following the trail led by the Ipuwer Papyrus, Velikovsky found similarities in the stories of ancient civilizations, describing strange movements of celestial bodies, great earthquakes, and rain of fire and stones from the sky, rivers turning red, or the sun rising from the direction in which it previously set. In The World in Collision, chapter East and West, Velikovsky refers to numerous Egyptian writings that remember two separate occasions when the sun rose where it should set, and two when it set where it should rise. These events were also written about by famous historians and thinkers like Herodotus, Plato, Pomponius Mela, Euripides, Strabo, Seneca, and so on. It's very likely that all these sources drew from the same Egyptian writings. To support his theory, Velikovsky found that the Chinese, Syrians, Mexicans, and Eskimos shared this same folk tale about the sun. Even the Quran contains a passage referring to this strange phenomenon. This singular odd event was not the only similarity found in the writings, as other stories about earthquakes and even the Earth turning upside down are shared almost identically by cultures around the planet. Velikovsky concluded that there must be a grain of truth in these stories and proceeded in his research to find the cause of the possible destruction. Where others saw cultural heritage and folk tales purely as myths, Velikovsky assumed that the common features of ancient myths were due to cosmological events witnessed by different cultures at the same time, with variations being a direct result of their differing geophysical observation points. Velikovsky also noticed that these cultures shared a remarkable story of a comet that appeared strongly associated in almost all tales with the planet Venus we know today. Ancient cultures about 3,500 years ago saw the sky as a four-planet system consisting of Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and Mercury, but if Venus was referred to, it was described using a word that meant comet at that time. Ultimately, Velikovsky compiled his own theory of the upheavals in the solar system, where a large celestial body collided with planet Jupiter, creating a new body, Venus, which, before settling into its orbit, caused chaos among the inner planets. This celestial drama is readable in Greek mythology, where the goddess Pallas Athena is born soon after the god Zeus, associated with Jupiter, consumes the mother, carrying Pallas Athena. Over the following centuries, the comet-like Venus settled into its orbit, intersecting the orbits of Earth and Mars multiple times. Needless to say, Velikovsky was severely criticized after the publication of his book. Publishers were demanded not to publish the work, based solely on the assessment of the submitted draft, and the final publisher, Macmillan, was forced to convene an expert panel to read and fully evaluate the work. To the disappointment of the scientific community, the expert panel spoke in favor of publication, and they experienced what amounted to a professional lynching. Outsiders, such as the then director of the world-famous Hayden Planetarium, Gordon Atwater, who announced plans to present a show based on Velikovsky's theory, were also lynched. Perhaps the biggest problem for the scientific community was the predictions made by Velikovsky, which were to be well-researched and testable, but which were concepts completely against the understanding of the time. One of the predictions related to the planet Venus. Velikovsky predicted that, being new, it would still be hot due to the interactions that had occurred, and it would have an almost untouched surface because it had not had time to serve as a target for the bombardment of small celestial bodies over millions of years. At that time, nothing was known about Venus's temperature or its surface composition, but the scientific community had estimated the surface to be typical, battered, and the temperature to be almost that of Earth. Velikovsky's absurd claims were laughed at. When Mariner 2 in 1963 confirmed both of Velikovsky's claims to be true, with Venus's surface being almost untouched and the temperature rising to over 400 degrees, the entire scientific community was shocked, searching for a way out of the dark labyrinth. Science writer Carl Sagan stepped in with a proposal for a runaway greenhouse effect, and a whole scientific community joined the battle to overcome the problem of the surface's untouched nature, eventually attributing it to unknown geological forces. Velikovsky's constructed world was so completely different from the known that it mixed up the entire intellectual community, leaving question marks in everyone's mind. His theory was built on the important role of electromagnetism, largely negating even the necessity of gravity. This gravity, the cornerstone of the universe, was the subject of a long correspondence between Velikovsky and Einstein, starting in 1945 and ending with Einstein's death in 1955. Velikovsky had presented to Einstein a theory that was again testable, that the planets were electrically charged bodies and their main interaction was electromagnetic. Relying on his theory, Velikovsky wrote about Jupiter as follows. Jupiter and its moons resemble a small solar system, with Jupiter being cold but still having moving gases. He claimed that Jupiter emitted radio waves due to its electromagnetic nature, not because of temperature-related properties. Einstein completely dismissed the claims, and although Velikovsky asked Einstein to suggest studying the matter, Einstein refused. In April 1955, two independent astronomers published information about accidentally made observations that confirmed the radio signals from Jupiter. After the discovery, a humble and embarrassed Einstein changed his stance on Velikovsky's request for radio wave research. He wrote a letter to his secretary authorizing Velikovsky to conduct all the experiments he desired. Just 13 days later, Einstein was found dead, the cause being a ruptured aorta. Open on his desk was one book, Velikovsky's Worlds in Collision. Other claims of Velikovsky's theory were the voltage of the Sun and the Earth's magnetic field reaching at least as far as the Moon. Both claims have later been proven true. Perhaps the most interesting part of the theory relates to the Earth's origin and original location. Velikovsky was very convinced that before its current orbit, Earth was one of Saturn's moons, which only after planetary chaos and the theorized nova phase of Saturn settled into its place. Based on his theory, he suggested that Earth's water came from Saturn. In November 2018, nearly 70 years after the book's publication, research showed this part of the theory to be true. Earth's water shares the same properties with Saturn, Saturn's rings, and all other moons except Phoebe. Water composition is used to determine where in the solar system planets were born, and the previously thought birth of Earth near the Sun has taken a surprising turn. The role of our solar system's two giant gas planets in Velikovsky's theory is very different from what we have read in textbooks. However, it is worth remembering that these giants are essentially star-like entities whose environment would only require the right conditions to ignite. Additionally, both planets are like mini-systems in themselves, each governing over 50 moons. We must also understand that the planet's plasmaspheres are largely invisible to the naked eye today, but even during the early Stone Age to the first advanced cultures, the magnificent auroras alone were awe-inspiring, colorful displays in the sky. It may be worth painting a more detailed picture of the events that the theory, or actually several theories based on Velikovsky's theory, have suggested. When David Talbot introduced the Saturn myth in the 1980s, the interdisciplinary stance on studies related to the history of the solar system expanded significantly. Over the following years, hypotheses based on the Saturn polar alignment model were refined and expanded, and alternative Velikovsky scenarios were proposed and developed. The Saturn polar alignment model refers to a system where at least 3 planets, depending on the hypothesis, orbit the Sun as if on a pole, one above the other, with Saturn being the highest and Venus, Mars, and Earth located in a straight line below. The theory has been deemed possible by physicist Emilio Spedicato and astrophysicist Antonio Del Popolo, but the system's dynamics are known to break down relatively quickly. Theories based on the Saturn model suggest that ancient people's symbolism is largely based on this celestial spectacle, where the different positions of the planets and the electrical discharges between them have created consistent and repeating patterns in both written and depicted tradition. Laboratory-documented plasma discharges and their shapes have been studied by Anthony Perrott, leading him to conclude that rock paintings and petroglyphs depicted around the planet very likely represent unknown, naturally occurring plasma discharges. In ancient art, a figure often referred to as the squatting man, surprisingly, has been one of the main themes in rock art, regardless of civilization. If the depicted figure was just squatting with its hands up, it might not be considered remarkable, but the symbol includes 2 circles at the level of the pelvis, which are in this case a feature strongly indicative of a plasma discharge. The circles are like the plasma tube itself orbiting the center, and with the plasma being partially transparent, the part facing directly towards the viewer is intensified, so the tube appears as if cut crosswise, forming 2 circles on either side of the pelvis. As Talbot's theory gained support, earlier predictions by Velikovsky about the star-like nature of Saturn and Jupiter were consistently confirmed with radio, infrared, X-ray, and ultraviolet images. Although Velikovsky's theory was comprehensive, it merely outlined the possibilities, and new observations and studies had to admit that science had largely ignored Jupiter's strong, mythical early reign. Indeed, over the years, to everyone's astonishment, science has rushed to aid, and the Saturn myth is no longer the sole reconstruction of solar system history that emphasizes a catastrophic planetary god drama akin to ancient myths. These recent speculations in astrophysics have increasingly drawn attention to Jupiter's leading role in organizing and maintaining the dynamic stability of the solar system. The most significant among these, the NICE model, offers an enticing description of the solar system's prehistory, attempting to account for most of the often overlooked mysteries facing our system. Reconstructions of events according to both the Saturn myth and the NICE model suggest that all planets were once closer to the Sun, in a much tighter system, until a violent encounter between Jupiter and Saturn scattered them to their far-flung orbits. The NICE model has evolved over the past 20 years, now including the catastrophic jumping Jupiter scenario, where continuous interactions among planets trigger widespread instability in the system, eventually leading to the nearly circular orbits of the planets observed today. Interestingly, how new astrophysics supports ancient myth-telling, allowing Jupiter to be rightfully placed during the era of Proto-Saturn and the Saturnalian polar alignment model, and highlighting its role as the disruptor of the Golden Age's cosmic order, as well as its impact on the transformation of Saturn and Jupiter from dwarf stars to gas giants. The early solar system is speculated to have been dominated by a binary system between Proto-Jupiter and the Sun. As a satellite orbiting the Sun and sharing the same center of mass, Proto-Jupiter was probably comparable to a brown dwarf in its hot phase. The so-called hot Jupiters, giant planets orbiting very close to their host star, are quite common in space. However, the NICE model has a significant flaw: its inability to explain Saturn's late arrival in the system compared to Jupiter's early formation. The only alternatives are Saturn's bizarre absence from the system or its very distant location. Computer simulations support both options. Evidence of Saturn's odd and wide orbit before its encounter with Jupiter can be found in Cicero's writings, among others. Ralph Jurgen's proposal that Saturn was an outsider star intruding into the Sun-Jupiter binary system has gained widespread support in modern cosmology. Saturn, located far away, approached Jupiter, exponentially accelerating its migration towards the Sun. It is quite possible that the Sun captured Saturn from outside its heliopause, but it's also conceivable that Saturn's distant location was the result of a previous major collision that sent it on a comet-like long orbit, eventually leading to a new approach, meeting the Sun and Jupiter. Its distant, cold position would have accumulated a charge potential significantly higher positive voltage compared to the low voltage of the Sun-Jupiter binary, naturally leading to its capture by the Sun and Jupiter due to charge alone. Proto-Saturn's boundless orbit was likely shortened by massive electrical discharges that occurred during its encounters with Proto-Jupiter during great conjunctions in plasmasphere interactions. When the plasmaspheres met in the Sun's flow field on a shared ecliptic longitude, Saturn's violent migration abruptly stopped. The extent of the plasmaspheres allowed for an electrical connection, even if the physical distance between Jupiter and Saturn was vast. In the electromagnetic environment, seeking equilibrium, charges led to a mean motion resonance between Jupiter and Saturn. Simulations show that Jupiter and Saturn moved in opposite directions, in this case, closer to each other, with Jupiter moving further from the Sun and Saturn approaching it. At the same time, Jupiter's rotation speed increased while Saturn's decreased, and presumably Jupiter cooled with each so-called planetary jump while Saturn warmed up. Concurrently, moons orbiting Jupiter and Saturn could have been ejected from their orbits before being captured again, with the lighter satellites being captured earlier than the massive ones. This means that Saturn, upon entering the system, could have brought along several planets currently orbiting in our solar system, including Earth. Upon closer examination, it is possible that the Earth's own plasma environment, as well as those of other planets and their interactions and changes, could be the reason for cultural but also scientific advancements in early epochs. Mystical imagery in myths and pivotal transitions in early history are key examples of this collective aspect of sky thinking. I hope this video sparks an interest in Velikovsky. He was one of the great mistreated geniuses whose ability to think outside of dogmas became a lifelong burden. Even today, his theory on the connection between myths and celestial dramas has not been disproven.